I made this cool little animation here. This is the exact same rig. This is the finished final version, and I've gone ahead and kind of colored all the moving parts and pieces just to make it a little bit easier to illustrate and conceptualize what exactly the goal of this rig is going to be. So let me play it here real fast. It's just going to kind of sit here and loop for a bit. So there it is, okay? This is what the goal for our time this week is, that we got to get all of this stuff moving in conjunction with each other. Let's kind of break down some of the parts and pieces here and take a closer look at what we're going to be physically accomplishing. Okay, so over here on the right, we have this big boiler. This thing is going to be static. It's not really going to be moving. It's just going to be sitting there. Now, if this was an actual train, and if this was, if this thing was actually moving out in the real world, this is going to be containing some sort of liquid or maybe some sort of steam that's eventually going to be pushing this green kind of piston, out and back, left and right. It's only going to be traveling along the z-axis, and it's just going to be moving in and out like that. That's what that green piece is going to be doing. So with that said, we need to figure out a system that allows for the movement of this green bar left and right. And if you notice very carefully, it's only moving perfectly along the z-axis. There's no up and down along the y or x. So that's an important element to keep in mind. Now, the next section that I want to kind of focus on is, let me stop the animation here real fast. Let's stop the animation. Okay, the next section that I want to draw your attention to is these guys right there. This junction, this little joint here is incredibly important, because if you look carefully, our little scene here, our little rig, is ultimately comprised up of two pieces. We have this yellow bar, which I've named bar 1, and then we also have this big purple bar, which I've named bar 2 inside the item list. Now, these two bars are connected at this location, at this joint. So if you imagine that this little guy right there, that little big bolt, that acts as kind of like a little axle, if you will, where each of these two elements are going to rotate around. This axle, if we were to look at this in 3D, is actually connected to the wheel itself. So when the train's moving, the movement starts here, right? The pressure or the liquid, maybe it's some sort of hydraulic fluid, forces this green bar out, which then turns this wheel, and it pushes this bar, which is on an off-axis joint, which then turns this second wheel. So if you think about it, these wheels are just kind of along for the ride. They're just kind of sitting there. They're not driving the train and pushing it forward. They're helping with the locomotion, but they're really not drivers in this entire operation. A majority of what we're going to be spending our time on today is figuring out this connection right here, because we're going to employ some Hollywood movie magic. We're not actually going to have this piston, this guy over here, this little green bar. This isn't going to drive the movement of our train, our digital train. This is going to be a secondary action that's really going to be driven by this bolt and by this axle moving around wheel number 2. So wheel number 2 is going to be kind of the central pivot point for everything that we work on today. It's going to be the driver of the entire operation. And so that's where we're going to spend a lot of our cycles. In addition, what would also be pretty cool, thinking down the line here, as riggers, we need to start thinking about how our animators are going to be influencing and working with this rig. I try to distill and boil my complex machine down into as few moving parts and pieces for my animators as I possibly can afford. It would be really rad if we had one locator within the scene that we could move and rotate, and then my entire train would follow that locator, kind of like a ground block, very similar in idea. But I want my animators to move one locator and then have the rest of the machine move. So keep that in mind. That's going to be the big picture ultimate goal here, is that we're going to have one locator that's going to spin that wheel, and then from that wheel, this little joint is going to move, okay? Now, with that joint moving, this entire piston over here, this green bar, is going to move left and right, okay? And then these guys over here, they're just going to be along for the ride. Those are the easy parts and pieces. So we're going to be spending a majority of our time talking about this and this green bar. These two elements in here are really what we're going to be looking at. Okay, let's jump back over into Modo and start getting going here. I'm excited about this. This is going to be a lot of fun. So let's get back to working inside of our train. I'm going to open up my project file, and I'm going to start by adding a couple locators. Now, if you remember back to the example, I mentioned before that these two bars, bar 1 and bar 2, are ultimately going to provide the biggest challenge for us. because we need to have these two bars move up and down, and at the exact same time, we also need them to move with the wheel itself. Let's look at the example again real fast, and put your eyeballs right there as I scrub through it. Notice that that axle, that joint, is actually moving up and down and left and right, and its Y position is staying the same. The bar is always facing the world axis, the world up. So world positive Y, not local positive Y, world positive Y. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for us to create. And we need to have a little bit of accuracy in here. So let's kind of jump back over into Modo and see how we can construct that system that allows us to have a locator that's going to be right there, basically traveling in a circle, up, down, left, and right, but also ensure that the locator's positive Y direction is matching the global world positive Y direction. Okay. Now, in order for us to create this relationship, we're gonna have to infuse, I think, 3 new locators into the scene. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it. I'm in the Setup tab. Now, you can also do this into the Animate tab, but as you can see, my Animation tab is really broken out into a number of windows. So I like working in Setup personally whenever I'm doing my rig, but just know that you get almost the exact same series of controls in Setup as you do in Animate. Okay. So let's go ahead and start working with some locators. I'm going to go over to my toolbar over on the left-hand side here, and that's my Add Locator button right there. And there's my little locator. To make it easier for you guys to see what's going on, I think with that locator selected, I want to go into my Display tab over here and begin to add a couple draw properties. I want to fill it with a custom color. Let's see, my fill color is going to be red. I think just to make it easier for you guys to see what in the world is going on, and easier and for you guys to see the system that I'm going to be creating, the wheel 2 elements are going to be in red, and then the piston arm elements are going to be in blue, just so you guys can kind of make sense of what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to fill it with red, and now I'm going to go over to Locator Shapes, and under the shape categories, I'm going to change the shape from default to custom. And this is where it gets fun. You can make this any shape. I think I'm just going to make them into a series of circles. So I want the style here to be replaced. Now this is going to control the visibility of this gigantic locator in the center. You may or may not be able to see this on the screen recording. For that, I apologize. But in the center of my gigantic cube here is the original locator. So with a display property, excuse me, if we go into Locator Shapes, and with a style property of add, we're basically adding the box to the locator. Well, if you don't want to see the interior locator, as I don't, change it to replace. Now we're replacing the locator shape with the cube shape. Pretty cool. Okay, so I'm going to make mine into a circle, and I'm also going to align my circle to the x-axis. That way it's kind of facing the orientation of all of my wheels. Okay, pretty cool. And I'm also going to make this much smaller. Just reduce the radius of my shape. There we go, maybe a little bit smaller. And I don't necessarily need to see the center point. I know, I'm just going to kind of keep in the back of the mind that I'm not really going to be messing around with the location of the center point. I'm not going to be doing any sort of center point offsets, and we could do that in these channels here. We can offset my little locator from the position of the center point in the scene. So I'm just going to turn off the visibility of my center point, and you can do that by going back into this 3D Items tab over here. And at the top, we can say visible. Now this is going to be the global visibility of this locator. This is the visibility of the pivot point. And then this third one right here is the visibility of the center point. And I'm just going to turn this to no. Okay. Now when I select it, I don't see the center point. Okay. All right. Now I know that I need 3 of these, because in order for this entire system to be generated, I need to triangulate the position of 3 different vertices. So I'm going to duplicate this locator 2 additional times. Just right click and choosing duplicate. There we go. And before we start moving them around and positioning them, now's probably a good time to really start naming them. So this is going to be the wheel, wheel base. Okay. The second one I'm going to call the wheel center point. And I'll explain my naming conventions here in a minute. And then the wheel end. Oops. Okay, now that I got all 3 of those named, let's start putting them into position. We're going to start off with the wheel base. In order for us to figure out or in order for the computer to figure out where this little axle, this little guy right here, where that point's going to be, we need 3 locators. And these 3 locators are basically going to triangulate, if you will, the position of a new 4th locator that the computer is going to generate for us. Okay, so in order for us to get this intersection, we need to place all 3 of these locators in very specific locations. Okay. Now, I'm a big fan of these drop actions. These up here are pretty neat. So at the very top of the screen, we have an entire pull-down menu called drop action. And if you look very carefully, there it is right there. And this is the pull-down menu. Okay. I love these. There's a whole bunch of them. Each one's going to do a different operation, but we're going to be working with match position. So I'm just going to activate that right now. And then we're going to start kind of outlining the location of these 3 locators. So we're going to start with wheelbase, and where I want the wheelbase locator to be completely centered around this wheel, but I don't want it to adopt the wheel's exact center point. I only want it to adopt the X and the Y, the Z and the Y channels of this item center point. So check this out. This is actually kind of cool. I got my wheelbase locator selected, and if I go over here and select wheel 2 on the list, okay, over here in my setup tab, we have this wonderful, wonderful tool called match. Okay, so we get this match and align category of tools. We've got item position, rotation, match scale, but match is kind of cool, because match allows us to pick and choose which axes to align inside the OpenGL viewport. So we want to set the mode to item because we want to align the item's positions. Okay, we can also choose to align the rotations or the scales, but we're working with positions. And then we get to choose which orientation or which axis we're going to be aligning to. So I want the Y. Boom. Okay, and now you can see, let's see, did I move it? Now you can see that the wheelbase has adopted the Y location of my guy, and it went through, it did all 3 at the moment. Let's see, what is going on? I'm going to turn off the other 2. And you know what? I think I might have accidentally dropped these on each other. Yeah, I might have. That was my mistake. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do this again. So I'm going to select the wheelbase, hold down the control key, select wheel 2, go back over to setup, match, item position Y. There it is. I think I accidentally did a drop action and my locator moved to the center of my wheel. But with this align, you can see now that that new locator has basically aligned its center point to match the location, the height, if you will, of the wheel's center point. Let's look at it from the right. Looking pretty good. Up and down, it looks pretty rock on. But left and right, we're still off. So that's the Z channel. So we're going to do the exact same thing again. We're going to select the wheelbase, hold down the control key, select the wheel 2, and now we can do match. And instead of matching the Y axes, we're going to match the Z. There it is. If you look at this from the right, bam, now we're perfectly dialed in. Okay. Pretty cool. All right, so let's get the other 2 kind of dialed in. These other 2 are a little bit easier. We're going to start with the wheel center, and this is where the drop action needs to be set to match position. I love these drop actions because they make it very fast and easy for us to align things or parent or link things together inside of Modo just by dragging and dropping them on top of each other. So you can do this in the OpenGL viewport, but since we have 2 locators kind of already on top of each other, that's going to be a little bit of an issue. Ensuring that we're selecting and moving the correct thing may or may not happen. So I usually, in situations like this, I usually start over here in the item list and I grab my wheel center and I'm just going to drop it on wheel 2. Bam. And you can see that after I let go of my mouse, that center, that locator, the wheel center, has now been moved to share the exact same location inside of our 3D space as the center point of wheel number 2. We're going to do the exact same thing with wheel end. Drag and drop it on top of wheel 2. And before we're done though, I'm going to activate the Y key, item transform, and simply move it down below the wheel itself. Okay, let's look at what we've constructed here. We have 3 locators. We have wheel base, which is out here over in kind of what I'm going to call the middle of the terrain. And then we have wheel center, which is sharing the exact same location as the center of our wheel. And then we have wheel end, which is down below the wheel. So I mentioned a little bit before that we're basically going to triangulate the position of a vertice, okay, or excuse me, the position of a new locator within the scene. with this system constructed, the computer is going to look at the location of each one of these these locators, and basically determine a line in which these locators are going to share. And specifically, the ones that are the most important are the center and the end, because we want the computer to figure out this plane, if you will, okay, this plane. And it's going to place the locator somewhere along that plane, which is why it was important that we have the wheel center be aligned to the center of wheel 2, and that this one also share the z-axis value as the wheel. So somewhere along between these two locators, the computer is going to help us establish a new locator. Okay. This base is just kind of a reference, okay? It's kind of a reference. You need three items in order for this system to work. So there's my 3. And the two most important ones that I've learned in my experience are going to be the center and the end, because these really do establish where that new locator is going to be generated in the scene itself. The selection order is also critically important. If you mess up the selection order, the computer is not going to give you the result that we're going to need. So the selection order that I've established here is that we start with the wheel base. This is kind of a reference. This is kind of a world position reference. This point over here is going to help the computer understand the global orientations of all of our axes. So select the base first, and then we're going to hold down the control key, select the center point, and then select the end, wheel end, okay? Remember, wheel center and wheel end are basically the planes in which this new locator is going to be derived upon. Okay, with those 3 selected, let's go back over here to our rigging tools, and I want to choose modifiers, and then check it out. We have a new option floating down here at the bottom. It's called intersect 2 items, intersect line 2 items. This is exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and apply this constraint to our scene. Now, it's going to do a couple things. You can see that we have a new piece of UI here. There's been a line drawn from all these locators, and more importantly, you can see there's a blue line going from the wheel center locator to the wheel end. It's also generated a new locator over here in our item list. This is one that we did not initially create. This is a computer-created locator. Also, the wheel base is the home to the actual constraint itself. And if we select the intersect constraint and go to the Properties tab, we have some parameters in here that we need to look at. And first and foremost, we need to look at the length channel. This is the location of that new locator in the scene. And maybe just to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on, I think I'm going to select that new locator. There we go. And I'm going to call this bar driver. Or here we'll do bar mover. Okay, because this is physically going to move all the bars. And let's change its display properties here. Make it a little bit easier for you guys to see. I'll add some draw options. We'll fill it with, green. Green will be good. And then we'll also change the shape of our locator to a custom shape. We're going to replace it with a pyramid along the y-axis, and that's a massive pyramid. So let's make it a little bit smaller by changing the size parameters down below. Okay, there it is. And we're also going to go in and change the visibility of our center point to no. Okay, so let's go back over here into our item list and start looking at what we need to change. I want to zip over into my right viewport just to get a little bit of accuracy. Selecting our intersect constraint under the wheel base is going to yield us access to this length parameter. Now, this length parameter is basically going to determine the location of this new locator of the of the bar mover locator, my little pyramid here. If I interactively kind of change this value here, the length value, there we go, I'm just going to drag it. You can see that after a while, can you guys see that? That point right there. That point's moving, and as it shoots from the wheelbase, and which is why it's so important, it's going to shoot a ray down from the real wheelbase to the wheel center, and once it hits the wheel center, that little point is going to start influencing the location of our locator up and down between center and end. So I'm just going to keep going, then boom, yeah. See, now it's manipulating the location of our little pyramid, which is exactly what we want. Okay, let's jump back over into our right viewport. There we go. And let's get a little accuracy here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to zip over into wireframe mode real fast. And the reason I'm zipping over into wireframe is that I can see through all my mesh items. And if you look very, very closely behind, there is a circle here, which represents the joint in which this locator is going to move around. And you can kind of get a gauge for the center of that joint. And another great little handy dandy trick, if you hold down the control key before you click on the slider arrows, you get a little bit more accuracy and precision. It's going to give you very fine movements. That's what I'm going to do. Small movements here. There we go. And I'm just going to kind of line the location of that center point in with the center of that joint. Rock and roll. That's exactly what we want. Let's go back out of wireframe and back into advanced OpenGL. And there's the product of what we got going on. Okay, mission accomplished. The first locator has been established. But right now, they're just kind of not doing anything, right? If I was to move wheel 2, let's just go into item transform mode here, Y key, nothing happens. We're eventually going to be rotating all of our wheels along the X rotation channel. So we need to start linking all these elements to each other. We need to start parenting all of our locators to each other. So I'm going to take the wheel base, wheel center, and wheel end and drag and drop them onto wheel 2. Like that, which is going to parent those locators to the wheel. There we are. And now if we were to rotate the wheel, you can see that we're starting to establish the system that's required. If you look very, very carefully, the tip of our pyramid is always facing world Y, which is what we want. It's always facing up. Mission accomplished. And it's sitting right at that little joint, which is also what we want. Okay, mission accomplished. I like this. We no longer need those 3 circles, so I'm going to go back over here and simply deactivate their visibility for the time being. We don't need to see them. I'll leave the pyramid on just so you guys can see what's going on. Okay, now that we've started to establish some relationships here, let's start linking these up. I'm going to go grab my bar mover locator and drag that into my wheels folder just so it's part of this entire hierarchy. Since we've established a locator that's going to rotate around my wheel and also maintain its axis or its orientation to the global Y, I can go in and start parenting left bar 2 to that locator. Okay, rock and roll. Now if I rotate wheel 2, yes, that's what we want. Looking very, very solid. Okay, great. Shoot, while we're here, might as well do bar 1 as well. So let's go into bar mover. I'm going to grab left bar 1 inside of my item list and drag and drop it on top of left bar 2. Now, you don't necessarily have to drag it on top of left bar 2. It's not going to hurt anything because as we rotate, you can see that now they're all moving together. Rock and roll. That's what we want. Brilliant. You could, if you wanted, remove it as a child of left bar 2 and just parent it to bar mover. That works because you're effectively going to get the exact same action. Okay, cool. All right. This is starting to look pretty good. So wheel 2 system done. Now it's time to go in and start outlining the system that's effectively going to allow us to move this piston in and out. Okay, let's jump in and continue working here. We're effectively going to be doing the exact same thing. Instead of establishing a locator that's going to be moving up and down, we need, like we did with bar mover, what we need to do is create a locator that's going to move left and right. So we're going to create a new locator, a new series of locators that's really going to operate and influence this little piston arm from moving left and right. Now, from that movement, we'll be able to derive a directional constraint for bar 1. More on that here in a minute. So let's get our locators established first. Let's add a couple locators. And once again, I'm just going to make, you don't necessarily have to do this whole display thing. I think I'm just going to do it just to make it easier for you guys to see what's going on. These guys are going to be blue. And I don't want to see their center points. I'm going to go over locator shapes. And I think I'm just going to add a custom locator shape here of we'll replace it. It's going to be a circle. It's going to be aligned to the x-axis, and we'll also make it pretty small. Okay, cool. That's exactly what we want. And I'm going to need 2 of these. All right. Okay, I'm going to need 2 of these. So let's just duplicate it. Rock and roll. All right. Okay, so in order for us to very quickly flush this out, we're going to be employing that match command again. Now, let's look at the moving parts and pieces, the physically moving parts and pieces of this element here. And I want you to focus on the plane in which these elements are residing. For bar 2, this one, see how it's kind of offset? Bar 1 is kind of to the left of bar 2. It's sitting outside of it. Now, we need to be very, very careful as to where we place all of our locators, because we need to ensure that this piston move exactly along the z-axis, perfectly straight and tangent to the boiler, to this thing over here. So that's going to be an important element. And let's look at all the center points of these pieces just to ensure that things are where we need them to be. I want to examine them from the top. Yep, so I got bar 1 selected here, and its local z-axis is just kind of shooting down this bar. Awesome. Let's grab the piston, the left piston itself. Now, this one, for whatever reason, it looks like the center point here is not where we need it to be. So I'm going to have to take a look at that. Okay. Let's go in. Let's get this dialed before we start. I'm going to turn off the boiler. Yeah, look at that. It's just offset. I don't know how that happened, but it's time to get this kind of dialed. So I'm going to go into edge mode and simply right-click and drag out, or let me just double-click on it. There we go. I'm going to double-click on that back edge. Now, with that back edge selected, I can go to the top of the screen where it says work plane and align my work plane to that selection. So what we've, in effect, have done here is we've taken our work plane and we've centered it around the selected 3D components. To illustrate that, if we go to work plane, draw axes, you can see that the computer has automatically put the origin of our work plane in the center of that selected edge. Rock and roll. We can utilize this and take advantage of this system by then going over to, let's make sure our center point is selected. I accidentally clicked off it, so I got my piston. I'm going to go into the center point there, select the center point, and now if I go back into the setup tools, to work plane position, and it automatically moves the work plane to match it automatically moves the center point to match the work plane's position. Perfect. Don't forget to reset your work plane. Things are going to be odd if you don't reset them. Okay, rock and roll. That's what we want. Let's go back in. Let's double check our boiler. I'm going to go back into item mode now. Yep, our boiler, we also need to kind of get that dialed as well. We're basically going to do the exact same thing, but this time, instead of doing edges, we'll just do polygons. We'll loop select kind of that middle section there, align the work plane to that selection, grab the center point for that item. There it is, way off over there on the right, and we'll align it to the location of our work plane. Reset the work plane, and now we're good to go. Okay, so let's start getting all this stuff kind of dialed in. I need to turn off the axis of our work plane. There we go. Okay, so what we need to establish here are 3 locators. And these 3 locators are effectively going to help us establish the position of all of our, it's going to help establish the movement of our piston going in and out. Effectively, we're doing the exact same thing as we did for wheel 2, just the angles are going to be a little bit different. Okay, so let's explore this for a second. So let's go in and start aligning all of these locators to their new location. Now, we have to be very careful as to where we place these locators within the scene, because we want to make sure that our piston is moving along a very, very specific plane, which is why I went in and just double-checked to ensure that all of our elements are just dead on in alignment with each other. So the first thing that we need to do is that we need to establish a locator that basically matches a couple different things, okay? First and foremost, we need to have a locator that's in the center of our wheel, but it needs to be in the same location along the x-axis as bar number 1, okay? So let's kind of dial that in real fast, okay? So we're going to need 2. We're going to kind of reuse the structure that we employed earlier. So we got a piston base, and then we also have a piston center. Now the piston end is actually going to be an item in the scene, and you'll see that here in a minute. Excuse me, the piston center, this is piston center. The piston end is going to be the boiler. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what we in fact need to establish is the location of the piston base. Now the piston base one, is, again, this is the one that's going to provide the world rotation and the world position information into the entire intersect modifier. So and this is going to seem kind of strange, but what we need to establish here is we need to have this piston base locator kind of follow our bar locator, our bar mover, okay? So what we're going to do is that we're going to go grab piston base, and we're going to start matching it to the location of this item in here, okay? So what we're going to do, or you know what, we'll do this. We're going to grab piston base, then hold down the control key, grab piston mover, and let's just match their Y axes together. Bam. Okay. Fantastic. If you look at it from the side, things are looking okay. I like it. Okay. And now let's match the piston base locator to the bar 1 item, and we're going to align their x-axes. Oops, not align. We want match, excuse me, match their x positions. There we go. Fantastic. I like it. You know, another thing that we could have done, and which would maybe potentially would have been a little bit faster, is that we could have taken our piston base and we could have dragged it. We could have done, let's see, we could have done a drop action on the bar mover. That could have worked as well. But if you look at it from the right, we're off ever so slightly, so maybe that's a good idea. So I'm going to go in here real fast, and I'm going to take good old wheel number 2 and just hide its visibility just temporarily, just so I don't accidentally align piston base to the wheel 2. So I'm just going to drag piston base on top of the locator. Perfect. Okay, now they're sharing the exact same space within the scene. We don't necessarily want the locator over there, so now we'll grab piston base, hold down the control key, select left bar 1, and now we'll match their x-axes like we did before. Okay, because effectively we want piston base to be centered along the x-axes of bar 1, so that its plane is matching the piston that's actually going to move itself. We can turn wheel 2 back on, just so we can start to visualize the entire system here. Okay, rock and roll. This is starting to look pretty good. Now, in addition, we also want to have piston center, okay? Because the center point here is the center, the center locator and the end locator effectively establish the plane in which the new locator is going to move along. So its orientation is also very, very important. We're going to do a drop action of its position on top of wheel 2. So, and then we're also going to align its position to the center of bar 1. So we'll match it along the X, bam. Okay, rock and roll. That's exactly what we want. So if you look at the structure here, we've taken piston base and we've aligned it to the orientation of this little axle here at this big bolt. Now we want piston base to move with the wheel itself, okay? So let's get that kind of dialed in, because right now, if we were to rotate this, yep, it doesn't move. So let's, Shift A, there it is. So let's figure out where we need to place piston base within the scene itself. Okay, now there's a couple things in here that are going to be moving. Now, if we look very carefully, effectively what we need to do, let's get, well, piston center is the easy one. Piston center, we can just parent that over here to wheel 2, right? That's just going to move. Well, what would happen if we took piston base and also parent it to wheel 2? Would that move the way we want? The answer is yes, it would move the way we want. So that's an excellent structure for our locators. Okay, so we've established 2 out of the 3 locators that are required in order for the intersect modifier, or excuse me, the intersect constraint to establish that new plane. So let's go ahead and start dialing in which ones that we're going to select here. All right, so we got the piston base. That's going to be the first one. Piston center is going to be the next, and the last one that we're going to select, believe it or not, is going to be the boiler. This one over here. That boiler. So let's do it in the item list. Hold down the control key, click on the boiler, and now we've established 3 items for the intersect constraint to establish a plane within. So we'll go back over here to our setup tools. We'll go to modifiers and choose intersect line 2 items. Boom. Mission accomplished. If you'll notice carefully over here in our item list, once again, our piston base locator is the home of the actual intersect constraint itself. And like we did before, we're going to zip over here into the right viewport, and you can see that now we have a perfect straight line. This is exactly what we want. Yep, perfect straight line, and it's, it's so close to the center of that bolt that it's good enough for me, but most importantly, it matches the center of the piston behind it. This bolt might not be orientated vertically, it might not be positioned vertically within this detailed mesh correctly, so this bolt is probably not the best indicator. What is the best indicator is if you look very, very carefully, if you were to go into edge mode here, that edge, the center of the boiler, the center of the piston, all matches the plane in which this intersect constraint was constructed around. All right. Oops, excuse me. There we go. Let me grab my intersect constraint once again, and we're also going to start working with this length property. Get that kind of dialed in. You can see the little dot moving along the plane vertically, and then it's going to get to a point where it's going to hit that piston center, and then it's going to start to shoot across that plane. And what we're going to do here is that we're just going to zoom in a little bit, see if we can get some accuracy here. I'm going to hold down the control key. Oh, nope, looks like I'm going to get it just right there. That's good enough for me. All right, let's see what happens now. Oh, if I go back into item mode and rotate my wheel. Yes, perfect. This is exactly what I want. If you notice carefully, this new locator is moving left and right, perfectly along the plane of all three of those locators that we established a moment ago. This is exactly what we want. Okay, perfect. Let me hit undo and get everything kind of back to its rest position. I'm also going to start cleaning up my item list here. Here's that new locator that was generated when we created the intersect constraint. So let's give this a good name. I think I'm just going to call this piston mover. Fantastic. And let's throw this into our wheels folder. Groovy. And let's start linking this thing up. So basically what we want is that we want to have our little piston here be parented to the piston mover. So I'm just going to left click on the item in the item list and drag it on top of piston mover. Mission accomplished. Let's see what happens when we when we rotate wheel 2 now. Look at that. It's a work of art. Now our piston moves in and out, and we're creating the illusion that this thing is actually all one piece. So the last piece of the puzzle here, I'm just going to go in real quick, turn the visibility of my locators off. The last piece of the puzzle here is getting this bar to point at that locator or at that position. Now, there's a couple things that we can do in here, so let's kind of explore this option here. Now, this is going to be driven through a directional constraint. So as we explored earlier, we've got to make sure that the child is selected initially. And I've gone ahead and placed the center point of this object down here at the axle because I don't want to move this part. I want the end to basically pop up and always look at that locator. So let's select the locator second, piston mover. I just want to expand this, make sure that left bar 1 is selected and piston mover. And then over here in our modifiers list, we can choose directional constraint. And huzzah, there it is. Looking pretty good. Let's test the system. I want to turn the visibility of piston mover off. Here's kind of a great little trick about working with locators. If you go into the display category, we were talking about locating all the center points earlier, right? So if you just turn the visibility of the entire locator to no, okay, notice that it hides all the children that are associated with that locator. When we change the visibility to no hide children, it's in effect just kind of toggling that visibility icon in the item list on and off. However, if we go in and change visibility just to no, what it's going to do is that it's going to leave the visibility of all the children of that item active. So left piston is still on. All right, let's check this out. Let's do the same thing for our bar mover. Visibility is just going to be set to no. Rock and roll. If we grab wheel 2, which is ultimately the element that's going to be influencing all of this, rotate it. There it is. That's exactly what we want. I'm really happy with the results of this rig. We still have some additional work to get done, but I think that's a good stopping point.